become better investors, more from a psychological dynamic. But we're, I don't know how long Stan's been waiting. Hopefully not too long. Stan, you're on the air. Welcome to Paul Ruedi's On the Money. How you doing, Stan?
I'm doing good. No, I haven't been on all that long,
good.
But I just thought I'd use your program to call and take a victory lap, if you don't mind.
If it's a short lap, Stan, how about a short victory lap?
It is a short
okay.
lap. Last year, I think it was the second quarter, we had a 4.2% GDP growth rate.
Yes.
And the conservatives were all agog about how great the growth rate was. And I pointed out that it was a one-off. And I said that the annual report growth would be less than 3% as it had been under Obama, because we're still in the Obama economy. And a lot of people pushed back against me. But now that we know what the growth rate was for last year at 2.9%, I was right.
We'll give you some stars on that, Stan. I'm willing to go that far for you. Now, and from a perspective standpoint, 2.9 is better than it had been prior to that. I'm not taking sides on who's to blame or who's not, and I'm not going to give Trump credit or not credit or Obama credit for having less than that for most of his tenure. But you're right. And, I think Fred was certainly on this too. I think he was in your camp. I don't think he got googly eyed thinking it was going to be that. In fact, he was always pretty steady of saying, I don't think that's getting to 4% or even 3% is very hard right now. But you were right, Stan. I'll give you credit for that. And now I'm going to get notes saying I was nice to Stan, and I'm going to get notes about, hey, you were nice to Stan. You're not allowed to be nice to Stan. Go ahead, Stan.
Well, conservatives don't usually deal well with the truth. So, you got to expect that sort of stuff.
Or at least your version. Come on, Stan.
No.
I don't know that any of us really know the truth. We all have our views, and we all have our biases, and probably somewhere in between lands the truth.
There is data, and data is the truth, because it's backed up by fact.
I understand, Stan. But
when Obama took the White House, we had a negative 9% GDP growth rate.
I understand.
And he ended his presidency with a 2.2% positive GDP growth rate, which is a pretty darn good thing.
Right.
And we're still in that 2% GDP growth rate range.
All right, Stan. Look, only if I seem like I'm being dismissive, it's just because I'm really trying to focus the show a little different direction. But your call was welcome, and I'm going to give you a couple of stars. I'm not going to give you 5, but I'm going to give you 2 or 3. Thanks, Dan. Anyway, I always like to have a good time with Stan. Stan has strong opinions and passion, and I think I enjoy that part. A lot of times I am on a complete different side of Stan. Of course, I'm all over the map, politically speaking. But anyway, we certainly we weren't extrapolating that 4.2% print in real GDP, but it was certainly an indication. And I still say the animal spirits are much more released today than they were 3 or 4 years ago. And part of that is just because we've had less regulation, less headwinds for business people. I've been a business person for 35 years. I feel it to some degree, but I can sense the animal spirits being unleashed. And I think that has trickled into why we're seeing the economy do so well, companies doing so well, earnings at all-time highs, dividends at all-time highs, and household net worth at all-time highs. I don't assign all that to any one administration, good or bad. I think if you get out of the way of business people, they tend to produce more. Some people don't like it. Some people don't like the casualties of that production. Anyway, we're getting way off on a tangent. Sorry, David. David's looking at me like so.
I didn't have much to add to that. I was just listening.
Anyway, you can call us 356-9397 if you have a call. One of the things I told you I'm going to do an audible in the show today, because I think it's something a lot of people think about. We were talking about retiring early, and you said it's kind of this FIRE movement, financial independence. Retire early is one brand of it, and it's an interesting. You've been at this now. You've been in the in the financial field now for almost 7 years. Most of those with me dealing with real people in real retirements and seeing it all up close. What's your spin on this? I'm not going to call it an obsession. That wouldn't be right, but there's a certain, it's gaining a lot more traction in articles that you see. It's being published a lot more about this idea of what it is to have a lot of options at a very early age. Some people might call it early retirement. Kind of what's your take on that, and where's all this kind of coming from and going, and the pros and the cons, just kind of the stuff we were talking about in the car on the way here.
Yeah, I think there's some really good aspects to it, and then maybe some bad aspects. And I think a lot of the bad aspects might come from people misinterpreting what a lot of these authors are writing about, because I think the risk that you run is always delaying gratification and scrimping and saving on things that even bring you happiness now, so that you can retire and, quote, do nothing at, a relatively young age. And honestly, I don't think that's what the movement's about. I've been listening, I was telling you, to a couple podcasts of people that are well-known, early retiree type writers and authors. And
you mentioned a couple of them, Money Mustache.
Yeah, Mr. Money Mustache is one of them. He's one of the most well-known. And then I've been listening to a podcast. It's called The Mad Fientist.
Yeah, I've read some of his work.
And I like the term that they tend to use is, instead of retirement, it's financial independence. And whether you're looking at early retirement or just retiring at a normal age, I actually prefer that term over retirement.
Me too.
By a long shot, just because people like having something to do, and especially for people who retire on the younger end. And when I say younger, I mean, we've had people retire in their 50s.
Right.
And, at a certain age, you're still youthful. You still have energy. You want to do something and you want to be productive. And I was talking about earlier, Mr. Money Mustache basically alluded to the fact that, the secret to early retirement in this whole movement is that almost no one who retires early stops working completely. They earn income to some degree or another. So I do think, like I said, the main risk is just delaying all gratification. I think the benefits are, it's getting people to focus on being frugal, really clearly assessing what expenditures bring them happiness and what are just kind of extraneous things that don't really bring them happiness and get in the way of their financial independence.
And one of the things you talked about that I think is worth discussing today is kind of these, we call them levers, but this idea, if you're really thinking that you're trying to retire maybe a little ahead of schedule, or you're getting closer to retirement and you just have this fear, and what is it you can do? I mean, you can only save so much at that point. Your allocation at the end doesn't do much. But part of this is that kind of, I call this crossroads between saving a lot of money and frugality. And I talk to, and look, we deal with a lot of the millionaire next door type. Maybe they're a little bit shy of it or a little bit over, but I call them the millionaire, just pretty average people that did pretty average stuff, but they were either good savers or they were frugal or both. And I've always explained it this way: if you're a big saver, you're going to force yourself to be more, artificially more frugal than you could have been. If you're just naturally more a frugal person, you're probably going to save more, but either way gives you many more options at a much younger age.
Right. And that's what I was going to say. Think of the result of that, being frugal and spending less now. Not only are you accumulating more money, but you need less money to replace your spending.
Explain that. When you explain to me, you talk about Michael Kitts is on a podcast saying about the withdrawal rate and, and the impact of that.
Yeah. So if you use, and I've written a whole article on why you can't necessarily rely on the 4% rule, but just for the sake of an example, he used basically the 4% rule, which is withdrawing 4% of your portfolio balance. And he was saying, look, if you're not quite ready or able to fully replace your income or the income that you need, there's different solutions. And one of them is, well, if you can pick up $10,000 of part-time income, that's like adding, using the 4% rule, $250,000 to your investment portfolio. So it might shave a couple years off of work if you were trying to basically replace your income fully. Instead, maybe you leave the job that you don't completely love and you find something you really enjoy and make $10,000 a year. Or alternatively, if you can find a way to cut your expenses $10,000 a year, that's $250,000 less that you need to basically fund your spending. So there are alternatives to just working longer or saving more. It's, well, you can basically get the same result by working a different job, very part-time, or reducing your expenses a little
And
bit.
you said, but there's this, you have to guard against this. You only get one life in your 20s, and you only get one life in your 30s, and you only get one life in your 40s, et cetera. This, minimizing regret at the same time. But what these people are saying is, yeah, but those are things, and kind of how you approach that, or how they kind of talk about approaching that.
Right. I think, like I said, this kind of people will bring up straw man arguments, and I think the argument against the extreme frugality and kind of early retirement movement is, well, you only get one life. You need to enjoy yourself in your 20s and 30s. And these people say, look, I'm enjoying myself. The things that really bring me happiness are, my relationships with my friends and family, and my free time to spend on my hobbies, and, just pursuing my passions. It's not going out and buying a car or having the biggest house I can afford. And there's research to back that up too. So, if you look at research into the things that make us happy, and kind of it's the whole field of positive psychology, what they find is that, when good things happen to you, like you make a big purchase or you get a big raise, what happens is you get this initial boost in happiness, but then you basically go back down to your baseline, and they call it hedonic adaptation. And the same thing kind of goes for bad things in your life. So people overestimate the impact of kind of good things and also the impact of bad things. But the takeaway there is, people think, oh, if I'm not buying a new car, or if I'm not buying the biggest house I can afford, then in some way I'm sacrificing my happiness. And these people argue, if anything, it's going to make you happier because you're less financially stressed, you have more freedom. If you want to take a different job that pays less because you enjoy it more, you have that ability. Versus if you build in all these really high expenses into your life, you really strap yourself. You have to have a high income, and there's only certain jobs that provide high income. So you start limiting yourself.
Yeah, I think we all deal with these things differently. And when I talk about things, I really mean things, buying stuff and lots of stuff. It's really tempting particularly at our younger age. It's kind of this, whether we're doing it consciously or not, this keeping up with the Joneses. And I always think, what I've learned now that I'm almost 60 is the Joneses can't keep up with the Joneses. So I might as well not try. I even know now, maybe it is a function of age, but I'm at my highest earnings ever at this point in my life, and I'm at my lowest expenses ever in my life. I still drive a 12-year-old Chevy Suburban with 215,000 miles on it. My wife drives a 2005 Lexus. We have a small house payment. That's it. And I can tell people, in my experience, and you guys have heard me tell you guys, look, it's okay to make a lot of money. It's not, and I'm not suggesting I make a lot of money. That's not my point. But I say it's okay to make a lot of money. It's not okay to need to. Those are two different things. And what is the one thing we've probably noticed more than anything for the clients that are 55 or 60 years old, that have the option to do what they can control their own time for the first time in their life? I mean, would you agree with me that it's they never really earned all that much money, but they were just a little more frugal than the people they work next to?
Yeah, I mean, that's the only way to get there, to be honest. It's math. You have to save to accumulate money. To save, you have to spend less money than you make. So it's kind of common sense.
Do you think it's because people have such a hard time because they don't know how to price it? In other words, they really don't know what that a more frequent new car purchase, what that is really costing them at age 55 or 60 or 65?
A combination of that, and I think people just have a tough time prioritizing their future self over their current self. It's like, who knows how I'm going to feel 50 years. I don't really care that much about 50-year-old David, but 28-year-old David wants to, buy this new car or do something that is basically a big expenditure. The advantage that I always talk about that I have is I'm around retirees every day, and I see people who basically reap the rewards of their frugality during their working years, and I see how much that pays off and how happy these people are. And more than anything, it's just they're not stressed about finances, and that's kind of where I look at saving. Is it's not just about retiring, it's about, even in the moment, it's having that safety net so that you're not stressed if you have an unexpected expense or you lose your job or something. It's just kind of security, and it's freedom to pursue other jobs if you want to pursue another job. So there's benefits beside just pure retirement to, just being somewhat frugal.
Even along the way, it's not all the benefits are not just when you're suddenly 55 or 60 or 65. It's you're 30, and yes, your friends have a new BMW and you're still driving your old car, and maybe you're in a lesser home or an apartment. But there's certain benefits to knowing that, you don't have the stress that the guy that, or the lady that he or she earns twice as much as you, but they're stressed out every day. I mean, and if they're stressed out when they're young, they're probably going to be stressed out when they're older, because most people don't change.
Well, and then the other thing I hear from people commonly is I mentioned a lot of people who reach financial independence still choose to continue working because there's a social component to working. It feels good to do something that you're good at. Usually you get pretty good at your job after years and years of doing it. And it just gives you kind of a sense of purpose and productivity. So a lot of people choose to keep working, but you have a little different attitude when you don't need that paycheck, and you start making different decisions and you start behaving differently. And maybe you go to your boss negotiating, say, hey, well, could I work, until 3 p.m. each day, or could I work 4 days a week or 3 days a week instead of 5, knowing that if they say no, well, you can just leave your job, or if they want to fire you because you're not working full time, you're completely okay under those scenarios. So I heard a guy describe it as Office Space syndrome. So for the people who have seen the movie Office Space, it's the guy, he basically quits caring about his job, and then he ends up getting raises and things. Because
didn't they hypnotize him or something?
Yeah, they hypnotize him, and I don't remember all the details, but he just starts speaking more candidly to his bosses and just kind of doing whatever he wants, and just he's more pleasant to be around, and it ends up he actually becomes more successful in his job and he gets raises and things. And anecdotally, I've heard of people experiencing that. Once they reach financial independence, they have a more positive attitude, which employers like. Their coworkers like them more, and they start actually sometimes making more money and getting raises after they become financially independent.
It's interesting to see how many times we'll tell somebody they could retire today, and they're stunned because they just don't think in those terms, but yet they still go back to work. But they go back to work from that day forward, they go back to work differently. And I've also noticed just the overall, just because of the less stress and the happiness, and now the realization that because they've been reasonable in their standard of living, and they've been saving, and saving is important. And of course, then how you save is important. Maybe we'll get to that in a minute, but they also tend to begin mentoring the younger people around them, and, telling them, look, my financial advisor told me I could retire, and people are stunned, and they say, well, how could that be? And then they start mentoring them and saying, look, you guys need to do what I did, and you need to save. They're not lecturing. They just seem to be happy to mentor a little bit. But there's quite a movement and a lot of focus on this financial independence, retire early. I get it. I think there are a lot of good attributes to it. This, I think a lot of people look at it as, oh, it's a goal. I want to retire by 40. It's kind of, well, yeah, everybody is going to be working. You're when you think about that. In fact, I've had a very successful friend of mine who sold his company at a very young age, in his late 20s, early 30s. And finally he told me, and he said, I just found myself going to Lowe's and Home Depot and buying stuff a lot because everybody else I know my age is working. I mean, literally, you start thinking about some of the things. It really doesn't come down to quit working. It's have the option to control your time, negotiate the job that you want to negotiate, be in the field you wanted to be in. And I think there's certainly at those people, you have to envy the people that are in that position.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's freedom is another way to think of it. It's just kind of freedom to do what you want, when you want to do it. And if that's working, then that's great. You keep working. If it's not working, then don't work. And it's just nice to have that option and that autonomy and control over your own life. And everyone's different. So we see all kinds of different lifestyles once people hit that financial independence point. And I think one of the biggest recommendations I have for listeners is think about what you're going to do with your time when you do reach financial independence. Don't just hit it and then try to figure it out at that time, because you'll end up kind of sitting around bored for the first month or so figuring it out. And I think it is important to figure out, how am I going to actually spend my time each day? What are the things I want to accomplish during my life? And do that at least several months before you actually pull the trigger and retire.
Well, one thing's for sure, as I look back, things don't really bring you happiness, at least not near as much as you think. And it's always kind of a depressing thought. I just remember my philosophy teacher back in college saying that you only passionately love things until you have them, which is kind of a depressing notion. It kind of ruined the rest of my life, but not really. But I know, it kind of makes sense, and it has a certain ring to it. It's just kind of this sense of perspective of, okay, this thing that I'm about to buy that I think is going to make me happy, I think you have to know the other side of it and say, okay, what's the true price of this thing I'm about to purchase? And, and I think you can think about that is, well, what does it add stress to my life just by owning it? Well, because maybe I have less money in my safety net, or maybe I'm borrowing money to do this and I shouldn't do that. So I think we covered that pretty well. I noticed that we do have a caller, Beverly, on line one. I think we have Beverly.
Hello.
Yeah, Beverly, how are you?
Good.
What can we help you with today?
Well, I wanted to announce a 9/11 World Trade Center Memorial Quilt Project that's here at the Hilton Garden Inn in Champaign, Illinois.
Okay. And when is that? I normally don't do this on our On the Money show, but I'm certainly willing to let you just briefly tell us the when and where. Well, the where we know, but when.
We're here today until 9 p.m. and tomorrow from 9 to 9
And you said, remind me again where it is?
at the Hilton Garden Inn.
Okay. And what will you be doing there?
We're showing 300 quilt panels with the names of all the victims from 9/11.
Well, how cool is that?
Very.
Well, I'm glad you called and let the listeners know. I'm happy you did. And thank you for that.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye. I'm always happy to help. I mean, how could you turn that down? I mean, what a mean guy I would be. Kind of on that. And again, this is kind of reflections of my 35 years, I suppose, and your 5 years with me, or close to 5 years, of seeing people at a reasonably young age being able to control their own time. Some people call it retirement. I call it retirement optionality. You like the financial independence early in life. There was an article, and unfortunately, I can't cite it. I just kind of copied it over. I think it was on CNBC, but there was an article that says 5 things that rich people do. And it's kind of interesting. It goes along with this. For instance, Warren Buffett eats breakfast each day at McDonald's. Each morning, he asks his wife to set out $2.61, $2.95, or $3.17, which determine which breakfast he gets. When I'm not feeling quite so prosperous, I might go with the 261, which is the 2 sausage patties. Anyway, it's kind of cute, but that's more anecdotal. A lot of people are very careful, and it gets into these habits here because they've either had wealth taken away from them at one time, or they just don't see that it's particularly permanent. This is particularly true of the top 10% of the income spectrum, according to the 2015 survey of affluence and wealth by research by a polling firm, u.gov. Well, here's one of them. One, you'll find them in the aisles of Target and Walmart. 1 in 3 people with a net worth of more than $5 million say they shop at Walmart. Nearly half say they shop at Costco, and 4 in 10 at Target. So that's interesting. I guess it's hard to go anywhere and not have a Walmart and need, considering that Walmarts also have groceries. That may explain part of it. The second one is they drop coin at the dollar store. So these Dollar General type stores, nearly 1 in $5 spent there is contributed by the affluent. The dollar store value proposition. Okay, so that was from the executive vice president of checkout tracking. The third is they tool around town in a Ford. And so they give a story about one of these big quarterbacks driving. Kirk Cousins drives a GMC Savannah. But the data released August 2016 by CarSite Edmunds found the most popular car among people with incomes above $250,000 a year was a Ford F-Series F, followed by the Jeep Grand Cherokee and the Jeep Wrangler. You have a Jeep Grand Cherokee, Dave. I didn't know you were in the top fluent people.
I wish I had that income.
Among the 10 top most popular vehicles in America's wealthiest neighborhoods, half are non-luxury vehicles. Again, the millionaires next door that walk into our office, that explains most of them. They clip a lot of coupons. People making over 100,000 were actually more likely than those making less to use coupons. A survey of more than 8,000 shoppers by deal site deals.com. And finally, this is the one attribute, but maybe that's why they have this money. They just don't give away as much. They give a lower percentage of their income to charity, but probably bigger dollars, but lower percentage of their income. Middle-class Americans give a far bigger share of their discretionary income to charities than the rich. The data which looked at IRS records found the households earning $50,000 to $75,000 a year give an average of 7.6% of their discretionary income to charity, and households making $100,000 more give an average of 4.2%. So better savers, better shoppers, but maybe a little more careful with their purse strings. But then again, there's probably in dollar terms, it's probably a lot of money.
Right.
Okay. So another thing you wrote about I guess Paul wrote this blog, but you helped him write it. And I guess it was because Easter eggs gave him the watching, Ryan's little boy, Cooper, hunting for Easter eggs about 12 times at my house because he liked it so much that we had to do it over and over and over again, the same eggs, different hiding spots. So hunting for Easter eggs is fun, but hunting for lost investment accounts are not. And that's kind of the theme of Paul's blog. And David, you helped him. You've seen it happen, haven't you? And you've looked at that up close, and we want to talk a little bit about how to solve that and have it not, create a problem to begin with. And then, where do you go look in case that you may think that maybe one of your relatives has died, maybe it's typically your parents. Are there accounts that we don't even know about? So we deal with this a lot. So just kind of give us your thoughts on that.
Well, usually it happens, I would say, from a combination of things. I would say one is old 401ks from employers that just don't get moved over. And that's an easy thing to do just out of laziness. It's like, well, it's there, it's safe, it's fine. I'll just leave it there. And then it kind of falls by the wayside. And
there may only be a statement once a year in some of these. And so that, they get it and it's been a year and it's been thrown in the trash. And, for the next 6 months, you don't see any evidence. As if you're the person looking after their affairs, it may be hard to find.
Yep. And then the other thing I see is, I just have multiple investment accounts at multiple different institutions invested differently. And maybe I have these, whole life insurance policies over here, and I have these annuity policies over here. So not just different types of accounts, but all at different places too. And I think
so. Don't you notice with clients as they start nearing retirement, and particularly in retirement, they tend to like this idea of simplifying that issue?
Yeah, most do. And it's like less mental clutter to have like all these things just out there wondering, how each one's allocated, trying to remember all that. And honestly, I would say though, some people leave things kind of disorganized and in many different places, and that usually works, but it works until the person who handles the finances passes away. And I would say in the vast majority of households I run into, one person tends to handle the finances, particularly like the investments and the assets. And they tend to have a good grasp on things, but then maybe they either die or they have a serious health issue and they have cognitive decline or dementia. And then their spouse has no idea where everything is, or even beyond that, what is it? What is it invested in?
What type of account?
Like, if it's an annuity, what type of annuity is it? Is it a variable annuity? Is it a deferred annuity? Is it a fixed annuity? Is it an indexed annuity? There's all these different things. If it's an insurance policy, is it a normal whole life policy or like a variable universal life? And so they have no idea. And as Paul put it, they're basically on a scavenger hunt or an Easter egg hunt trying to figure all this out. And we've had that happen before where, we had the one spouse that was handling everything, and they had some accounts, like I said, particularly like they had some annuities that they had from back in the day and some insurance policies. And then they had a really serious health issue, basically couldn't handle that stuff anymore. And the wife, in this case, the wife had, wasn't sure basically everything that they had and what was in it. And so I worked with the son-in-law basically to go through and try to decipher all this stuff just based on statements that we're getting.
And it's a lot of time and a lot of stress. So the answer to that is simplifying. But some people are afraid to simplify because they think I can't have all my eggs in one basket. In other words, I can't simply have one major brokerage firm like a Charles Schwab or a Vanguard or firms like that, because they think of kind of as a way of diversification. We've had this beat into our heads that you can't have all your eggs in one basket, but that really shouldn't be a concern if you choose the right custodian, in my view.
Right. I mean, choose a reputable custodian, obviously one of the big names, Vanguard, Schwab, Fidelity, there's a number of them. But beyond that, I mean, you own the underlying assets within your account. So even if that particular company goes out of business, they're going to find a home for your account somewhere, and you're going to still own those same assets.
The second thing you put in there was to designate your person, in quotes. That is a person who's going to be responsible for helping you keep track of these types of things. How is that done on a blocking and tackling practical standpoint?
Well, I think typically it's a child who's financially responsible, but not always. It's just someone that you really trust who's financially responsible and also has a little bit of expertise in handling money and investments and things like that. And the key is to not wait until it's too late. And I would say I have no evidence to back this up, but it seems to me, just based on my experience and observation, almost no one actually does this. But it sure helps with a few people I've seen who do include their children on their finances or a trusted person, a few years in advance. It's like, you don't need to do this when you're 60, but if you hit 80, maybe you start thinking about these things.
Or maybe by mid-70s, because, once you get into your low 60s, you begin to lose one. Or every article I read about this issue, I've come to the conclusion that that they're accurate. There's different degrees of it, but 1 to 2% of your cognitive ability goes every year, I think, after you turn 65. I don't know if that's the right number or not, but I can tell you I can see a difference between the 65-year-old client and then when they're 75. And I mean, there's a wide distribution of that, but there is a difference. So I would think just from my 35 years experience, probably not wait till you're 80, probably by your mid 70s, have that person in place, discuss it with them. And there's software and tools that can facilitate that, is there not?
There are, and especially for sharing documents, like we use Everplans, which you can, make a person, they call it a deputy, where you can share certain documents and information with them. But at the very least, just make sure they know basically what financial accounts you have and where, and make sure they basically, have just a general overview of kind of your financial world so that if something happens to you, they can take over.
Maybe that's sitting down and either on a ledger pad or a spreadsheet. You literally just go through it. One of the things that gets in the way of that, if, you think of a 75-year-old today, with a broad brush here, I'm brushing with a broad brush, but still it was a generation that tended not to talk about money. It's just one of these things that ultimately, you have to make a decision. I'm either going to make this very difficult for my family to piece all this together, and there's a certain danger to that too, or we're going to have that conversation. And I kind of put that up there with, where am I going to live? As I age, am I going to live in my home? Am I going to live in a retirement community? And for those that are viewing retirement communities, that's best looked upon before it's too late, before you have a big fall. I get a little angry with some of my clients that keep postponing it. You've seen me get angry with clients in my nice way, but there comes a point that these are just certain things. You may not like to do them. You may not like to go think about being in a retirement home because everybody there is old, and you're 85 too. Hey, I have news for you. You're old too, but and I can get away with that just because they know me so well. But you still can't let that stand in the way because there's too much risk if you do.
Right. I mean, just pretending these issues don't exist and ignoring them just makes things worse, not better.
And it can be difficult, and it can take a lot of time piecing these estates together if there's not some type of ledger system and somebody, at least somebody that's knowledgeable that, look, even if you don't know all the details, you could say, look, I do all my banking with XYZ Bank. David is my financial guy. He knows here's his phone number. He knows where all my investment accounts are. And here's where my lockbox is. So you don't have to even get into the details. You could literally just say, okay, I have 2 insurance policies. Here's the company and here's their phone number. And you don't maybe disclose the amount of cash value or face value. And the same thing with your investment accounts. I have 5 investment accounts at Ruedi Wealth Management. Call David, if something happens to me. So there are ways around it. It doesn't mean you have to disclose everything about your financial world to make this work.
Absolutely. And I think the takeaway or the recommendation that Paul had is, look, if you're not comfortable kind of sharing all that stuff, at least if you can simplify it and have things in the fewest places and the fewest number of accounts possible, it'll make that job a lot easier.
Even if that's just you writing down all the information and putting it in a sealed envelope in your lockbox and just say, look, kind of like an emergency break glass, go to the lockbox and you'll have every one of my professionals' contacts, phone numbers, what the accounts are, where they are, etc. And then finally, I know he put if the accounts are completely lost. Fortunately, Illinois has a site you can search for lost documents. It's icash.illinoistreasurer.gov. You can basically do a Google search for lost accounts in Illinois, and you'll get there. But so that's worth looking at. Also, if you are suddenly in a situation where one of your relatives passes and you're kind of the person that's designated as the collector, so to speak, that's one thing. Even after a year or two passed, you might want to go back to that and see if there isn't something with your name on it, because I've seen that happen a number of times where you think you have everything and you don't quite have everything. Well, we kind of moved around a lot today. Thanks for Dr. Fred Gertz, of course, for calling. It was a condensed version, but he's traveling as usual. There's a lot of people that want Fred's time. We're just one of them. We're always glad to have Dr. Fred Gertz on board. Again, I think everybody should be happier today than they were last Christmas Eve from a financial standpoint with their investments. But remember, it's a permanent uptrend, but it has a lot of sheer terror in between on the way up, that permanent uptrend. So you just have to have the right psychological outlook, the right emotional outlook to realize that there's always bumps and bruises along that. And if you can do that, I think you can become a successful investor. Well, Dave, thanks for joining me today. Now we get to go back to the office and do the real work. But thanks for listening. Paul Ruedi and David Ruedi from Ruedi Wealth Management with Paul Ruedi's On the Money. Thanks for listening. We'll be back in a couple of weeks.
And fourth Tuesday of